So this is me. My involvement with Sikh Women's Aid has been that I supported the organisation from its inception. I was one of the co-directors of Sikh Women's Action Network, which sadly we decided to close. And it was because of the gap and basically the uproar in the community when we put an announcement out that we were having to close SWAN, that people said, well, what will happen to us now? Where are we going to refer people, victims, going forward? So, as Suki said, we made a decision to launch Sikh Women's Aid, and it's been phenomenal the last 6 months. There's been a lot of hard work, a lot of late nights producing this report, but we've got here today, which is brilliant. So what I want to do is, I mean, our report actually, what it talks about are incidents of domestic and sexual abuse in our community. But what I want to start with is that domestic and sexual abuse is not where abuse starts. This happens way before girls are even born. This is about an attitude and a behaviour of a community. Next slide, please. So this is me and my sister. My sister's sitting over there, and she didn't know I was going to show this picture today. So I'm sure she's not going to be too impressed with me. But this is a picture of us two in primary school, and you can see the matching jumpers that we're wearing. Yeah. Next slide, please. You can see our ponytails and things. Yeah. So this is me again, and. You know, after me and my sister were born, my parents obviously tried for a child again, and that's me there with my little sister. So my younger sister was born, and if she was here, she's not, she also wouldn't be very impressed as well. But anyway, so normally people would congratulate you when another baby comes along, and it's something that, you know, people would say, well, you know, congratulations, we're really happy for you, hopefully the baby's really well, and mum's really well, and so on. But these are the comments that my parents got. Ah, never mind. Ah, Singh, because my dad wears a turban, Singh's had another girl. That's very sad. It's not in your kismet to have a son. Don't worry, you can try again, and so on. And so that's how it was, you know. Our family in India even said, you know, my mum's sister said, oh, I've got 4 sons, I don't have a daughter. Well, you've already got 2 daughters, why don't you give us your youngest one? And I think for a split second my mum might have even thought about it, but my dad put his foot down. He put his foot down and he said no. And actually it's the reason why my little sister's probably the most spoilt out of all of us, because my dad wanted to make sure that she in no way felt inferior to any of us, and that she didn't feel like that she had come along and that my parents weren't happy about it. So they tried again. So along came my brother. So he's the youngest, and when he came along, it was partying all the time. So the world fell into balance, and the family were over the moon. Most of my relatives on my mum's side and my dad's side, they've all got sons. They've got an odd daughter here and there, but my dad was the only one with the 3 daughters. So everybody was absolutely ecstatic when my brother came along. But, you know, not everybody is lucky enough to have parents, especially in my generation, to have parents like my parents who didn't make us feel inferior to our brother. And my dad made sure that, you know, that we were treated equally. But this is a problem that still exists in our community. So we know that in India, that this is a massive problem. Violence against women and girls is a huge, huge issue, which I believe is not being dealt with. This sort of article is not uncommon. And although the practice of infanticide and feticide has been outlawed in India, and even the highest authorities for Sikhs has also condemned this practice, and as did our gurus as well, it's still happening. The reason this is so significant is because here in the UK, those people from India have come over, but people from here are travelling back to India to have scans done, to have abortions when they find out that it's a girl. And actually, we even have heard of stories where women are going across or being forced to go across to have scans done, and following the scan, they're being told it's a girl because the hospital knows they'll book them in and have an abortion, and they've lied to them. It's because the hospital makes more money if they carry out the scan and then follow up abortion. So women might even be aborting male fetuses and they don't know it. And for those that are poor people who live in deprived areas, and we know there's a lot of poverty in India, they can't afford to have scans and abortions. Those babies are given birth to. And boys are celebrated and girls are mourned. In some cases, girls are drowned, they're buried alive, or they're left when they're sick, and then they're left with no medical attention. And the parents will say, it's God's will. That's how it's explained away, and those children will die. The belief system behind this is that females, go back one slide. So, the belief system behind this is that females are inherently valueless. They're a valueless consumer who therefore is easily disposable. And this practice has also led to the worst ratios of male to female around the world. And India's not at the top, but it's up there in the top 5. Historically in Punjab, which is where most of the Sikh community have come from, a baby girl used to be put into a clay pot with a lump of jaggery, what we call gur, which is sweet, and a cotton yarn. And then they're buried in the pot while chanting, Gur khai punni katti, na apna ai veere nu kalli. This means, eat the jaggery and spin the cotton, don't come back. The next time, send your brother instead. And these were folk songs that women would sing when this was taking place, the murder of these girls was taking place. The jaggery, which is the sweet, is for celebrating a boy child. And the cotton yarn is what the sister uses to tie on her brother's wrist, is what we know as rakhi, what girls tie on their brothers for protection. So that's the reason for the cotton yarn. And these symbols, these folk songs, are written to invoke a son. So this is happening still today in India. And although we're talking about these customs and practices that are out there, that mindset is being brought over to the UK and has been as people have emigrated here. And I'm not saying that infanticide is taking place here, but we know that baby girls are being aborted due to being female. And you only have to go down the road into the hospitals on City Road and those sorts of places where you will blatantly see posters up outside the hospital where the scans take place in the rooms. They will say, please don't ask the sex of your child because the nurse is not able to tell you. The nurse is able to tell you because at 16 weeks they can tell what the sex of the baby is. But because it's in such a densely diverse area, they know this is taking place, hence the reason for them putting up the posters. Girls get married on and they don't remain within the family. And they don't carry the family name. And therefore they are of no use. That's what I believe, that people believe. The historical practice of dowry as well has a huge part to play in this. And even though today people they claim that they don't accept dowry, when we speak to friends in the wedding industry and those who are involved in wedding planning and so on, they tell us about the pressure that the bride's family has. People who have saved for all their lives to provide a lavish wedding, or they had to remortgage their house to meet these expectations. So now imagine that you've got 3 daughters like us. How much cost would be associated to those weddings? So I think we did, the slide went up, but I was going to ask the question. So the average wedding, and it depends on which research you look at, but the average wedding in a British white wedding costs around £21,000. The average Asian wedding is now costing £50,000 plus. And this is research done by wedding magazines and so on. And so how does somebody who's says, I don't ask for dowry, but actually we want the wedding to be in this really, really lavish venue. There's going to be 500 people coming. It's £100 per head. I mean, already that's starting to add up, and that's just the food. These are huge pressures on families, and it's part of the reason why people think, I don't want daughters, but actually can't afford to have one. So, I believe that domestic abuse and sexual violence in the Sikh and Punjabi community is a gender-based issue. It's about the value that women have in our society. Thanks. So apologies, I have been recovering from COVID, so I've been way outside of the isolation period, but I've still got an ongoing cough and so on. So, domestic and sexual violence in the Sikh and Punjabi community is a gender-based issue. It's about the value that women in our society and how that value is placed. There's a belief system that no one talks about. The only valuable thing a woman has is her womb. Through her womb, she carries the future generations. She allows the name of the family to carry on. Some of the most recent victims that we've worked with and called us on our helpline have come from India. A particular woman came here post-marriage to a UK citizen, but she, after talking to her, I understood that she was brought here to clean the house, cook for the family, warm the husband's bed, and to give birth to the children and the grandchildren. In this recent case, children were removed from the mum as soon as they were born. They were being brought up by the grandparents, mainly the grandmother, and they were taught how to answer back to their mum and also treat her like a second-class citizen and a slave. The victim wasn't allowed to learn to speak English and get a job, make friends, or do anything by choice. She couldn't buy clothes or shoes as she wanted. She didn't have a choice in any of it. And when I met her, she'd been in the country for 15 years, but the Western world had not touched her. She still dressed like a village girl from India, and she'd left there 15 years ago. She couldn't speak a word of English, and even her Punjabi was so traditional. You wouldn't think that she'd been in the country, living in this country for that many years. The Western world had not influenced her in any which way. It was like she'd been living in a time capsule. She hadn't been allowed to grow or flourish or make a life for herself here. She'd been brought here to be a slave for the family and for her womb. Next slide, please. So the survey. So the survey was initially carried out to feed into our strategy, the business planning for Sikh Women's Aid. And we thought we'd get these, 150, 200, 300 responses. But when we got to over 500 responses, and we did some interim findings, we felt really strongly that we had to share those findings with our community. We had to share them with our partners, and absolutely we needed to share them with the commissioners. Very recently, I was on a Zoom call listening into public health. They'd done some surveys, and they have been doing surveys for different communities, and there's been different Zoom calls relating to particular communities. In this Zoom call, there was one call about the Sikh community. So they'd not gone out and done research, but they looked at what research had already been carried out, and they devised their plan going forward, their strategy on how they were going to help the Sikh community based on those findings on the research that had already been carried out. On an hour-and-a-half Zoom call, all about the Sikh community and about the health and well-being, the mental health, the physical health, and so on of the Sikh community, there was not one mention of domestic abuse. Not one. And it might have been because there isn't much research out there. There is little pockets of research here and there, but not much at all. not anything that goes into in-depth. That might have been the reason why they didn't talk about domestic abuse. So that was one of the other reasons why it was so important for us to pull these findings together and to share so that people could see what is happening. Now, this report isn't in any way academic, and we hope that after people read this report, that people in academia do pick this up and take it forward to do that thorough research, but it's the starting point. And it's enough evidence for us to prove to commissioners and to our partners that this work is needed. So we had 674 responses to the survey. 79% were female, 20% male, and 1% decided not to say. It was a randomised survey. We tried to spread the survey as far and wide as possible. It didn't only go out to the domestic abuse sector because we were conscious that if we only send it to only our partners, that it could skew the numbers in some way. And we were very, very conscious of the ACEs research that's been, people have been going on about for years and years, the adverse childhood experiences. But now people are challenging that research because what they're saying is that those people were already attending for medical attention for different issues, health issues, and therefore the survey is skewed. So we were very conscious of that. And that's why we decided to try and push this as wide as possible and send it out to even friends and family members, people who work in all different professions. So we believe that we have, as much as we could, got a true reflection of what's happening in our community. And this is where it starts to get really frightening. So 70% of those people who responded said that they'd experienced some form of domestic abuse. That's 2 out of 3 respondents who said they'd experienced a form of domestic abuse. The national average that is written into any research that you see is 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men. I believe those figures are wrong anyway. I think it's those numbers are much, much higher than that. Women are not reporting. I know, working in this sector for the last 26 years, literally every single woman that I come across and hears about the work that I do will tell me that they have had some experience of domestic abuse in their life. So we asked, and we know this, but we asked for the sake of the survey, who are those perpetrators that are perpetrating domestic abuse against you? And you can see there, husband, wife and partner is 47%. And then alongside that, 24% was the second highest, which is your own parents. And then after that, we're looking at mother-in-law and sister-in-law and brother-in-law. And this is why we think we had this crisis during COVID, because often these victims are living in extended families. And where women are locked into these homes during COVID while they're isolating or we're in lockdown, there is no getting away from these perpetrators. Even if one perpetrator goes out to work, there's another one waiting in the wing. And this is continuous. And this is why we feel that we had that crisis at the time. We also, the data identified that 1 in 2 people had more than one perpetrator. So that's 47%. Had more than one perpetrator. So we knew this from our previous work, and we knew from talking to victims that they had multiple perpetrators. And so this just confirmed what we already knew. So then we asked victims, did they reach out to anybody? Did they tell anybody about the abuse? Did they access services? 34% said yes, they told someone. And 4% said maybe, and 59% of people said they did not report the abuse taking place. 31% of those participants informed family and friends, and 17% reported to services. Only 15% of them went to the police. So only 1 in 3 victims actually reported the abuse to somebody. That's not to say it went to professional services, but told somebody about what's happening. And there's more information about that in the report in detail. But, only 15% reported to the police, but 9% went to their GPs. Only 3% talked to NHS staff about this. And there's all this work going on in training GPs, and I know there's more, there has been some more stuff in the media about how they're training GPs to identify and look for signs and symptoms of domestic abuse, and training with health visitors and midwives and so on. And yet, victims are not reporting. That victim I talked about earlier, who's been in the country for 15 years, she's got 3 children. She would have come across these agencies, she would have gone to hospital to give birth, there would have been midwives involved, there would have been health visitors involved. Where are the teachers where these children go to school, for example? So nobody knows what's happening to this woman, or seen her even possibly, I don't know. Then we moved on to looking at sexual abuse. So this was to do with adults who had experienced sexual abuse as children. Again, this was really, really frightening for us. 35% of respondents said that they had experienced sexual abuse as a child, and 4% said that they weren't sure, because they said maybe. That's 1 in 3 of respondents who experienced sexual abuse as a child. The crime survey for England and Wales estimates around 7.5% of adults aged 18 to 74 have experienced sexual abuse before the age of 16. 7.5%. Yet our statistics, the respondents that informed us, that's 35%. That's huge, it's 4 times more. And we believe part of this is, the reason for this is the honour base, the shaming, the keeping the silence, and protecting the perpetrator. You know, because what's happening out there is, you know, children are being silenced, they're being told, but they're not getting the right support that they need. 87% of the victims that responded and said that they had experienced sexual abuse were female, and 13% were male. So although women are overwhelmingly affected by this, some boys and men have also experienced sexual abuse, and 13% is still significant. This was one of the scariest findings, and the reason why I think some people weren't sure about whether or not what they experienced could be classed as sexual abuse was actually written, one respondent wrote in her survey. She said, "My uncle touched my breasts while we were in the back of the car driving back after a wedding. He'd been drinking, and I'm not sure whether you would count this as abuse, as it was a one-off assault. Makes me angry that I cannot tell my family about it, as I would not want to cause issues for my aunt and her family, but I told a friend who helped me." So this young person experienced sexual assault in the back of a car by an uncle, but she doesn't know whether you would class that as an abuse because it's a one-off. So I think that's what happened with people, why they said maybe they had. So then we moved on to asking who the perpetrators were. And I think this is reflective of all communities. We know that people in the violence against women and girls sector won't be surprised by these numbers. We all know that victims of child sexual abuse and exploitation are more likely to be assaulted or abused by somebody known to them. Yet many people in our community and the media are guilty of this. They only publicise stranger abuse, or talk about grooming gangs, or online grooming. And yet the people who responded, and you can see the numbers there, the grooming gangs were 3%. Online groomings were 1.5%. Abuse from your cousin was at 22%. Someone known to you at 38%. An uncle, 18%. And that's not what we're talking to our children about. We don't warn our children about how to protect themselves from abusers. We make it easy. We don't make it easy for children to come forward. We don't have those conversations with them to help them feel confident enough to tell us about what's going on. The other alarming thing is, and it's something that we've been dealing with in Sikh Women's Aid very recently, is abuse by faith leaders. We've been really concerned about this, and it's not unique to our religion, our faith. We know that this has been happening across we know the church, in Christianity, we know it's happening in mosques. But the fact that we need to recognise, because there is people who will deny that this is taking place. And what people told us was that, you can see 6% of respondents said that they'd experienced sexual abuse in a place of worship. And because we're talking about Sikhs and Punjabi people, we can see it's probably likely to be a gurdwara. Change is happening, and it's not to say that it isn't. Very recently there's been a lot of work, and there's people in the room today who have been working really hard and coming together with other professionals to come up with safeguarding training and so on. And Gurdwara have started reaching out, and actually just from some of our media exposure over the weekend, our story about the report has been run in the Observer and in the Guardian. Yesterday we had 3 different Gurdwaras reach out to us and say, can you come in and talk to us? Which is great, it's fantastic. This exposure is really, really helping. But we still have a huge way to go. So we asked, next slide, sorry. Yeah. So we asked people about the impact. That was another thing. It was the third part of our survey, was about asking about how has the abuse impacted on you. So as you can see, 65% said that it had impacted on them. 17%, which is a big maybe, said maybe. 18% responded and said no. So of those respondents who said that they'd been abused, 65% said that it left a long-lasting impact on them. This is hugely concerning because we're talking about child sexual abuse here. And when you look at the Ofsted reports on a wider perspective, they've gone into schools, and what they said there was that around 9 out of 10 girls have spoken about the abuse that they encounter on a daily basis in schools. So being called sexist names, being sent unwanted sexually explicit pictures, videos that have been sent to them, and so on. We have a crisis across the board, not just in our community. And the violence against women and girls sector has a lot of work to do. I've seen it in my 26 years, children suffering with nightmares, bedwetting, 10-year-olds are still wet in the bed, underachieving in school, which are being labelled as learning disabilities, but actually it's down to the trauma that they've experienced, and children engaging in risky behaviours as well, which can lead to an even bigger impact on their future. And unfortunately, some of these people will never recover. So support services are crucial, and we need to invest in prevention programmes to influence these attitudes and negative behaviours in children and young people, so we can stop it at that level, and so that it doesn't manifest itself later. So the statistics told us that, you can see the numbers there, as to how this abuse impacted on those people. So you can see 72% with anxiety and depression, 67% said that they had difficulty developing trust with others, and then anger issues. And this is where sometimes, there's been a lot of conversation about whether if you've been abused, will you become an abuser? There's a lot of debate about this, and I think more research needs to be done. But our respondents told us that they suffer with anger issues. 46% of them, 43% said that they had intimate relationship breakdown because of what they'd experienced. So we know we need to do more about this. Okay, even if you don't report to the police, parents still need to get help for their children, because that's where we are failing them. So, just to wrap up, you have got some of the case studies in your reports, so I'm not going to go through these, because there are many more other than these as well that we've pulled off from, and we have had to change a few of them slightly because we didn't want any information to be recognisable for those people that responded. Now, 130 people of the 674 responded and added comments to the survey, and over 100 of them told us what had happened to them, where the failings were. So in your reports, we have sort of gathered up the subject areas of where those failings were, whether they were talking about the police, whether it was about the services that didn't respond correctly, and so on. So we put that into the report. But just to finish off, what I wanted to do was, before I finish off, is read a very recent case study that's come through. And it's not in your reports, because it's only in the last few weeks. So at 17, I loved my life, even though my parents had always tried to control me. I was at college and loving it. It was my time to be free. Then I met this boy who said that he liked me. My family found out, and my grandmother and uncle beat me. He was out of caste, is what they said. Whatever that means, she said. They said you can't date him, and him you cannot see. They kept me at home, which was devastating, and pulled me out of college. They waited for me to turn 18, then whisked me up and took me to India. There they forced me to marry a man that was a complete stranger. He locked me up and raped me, and my family didn't care that I was in danger. After 4 weeks of living a life of terror, I returned back home to a different kind of prison sentence. My parents had heard my screams and shouts, but they didn't care or help me. I was forced to apply for his visa, but God was on my side, as immigration refused him entry. So they tried over and over again to make me work in their shop, in their warehouse, in their business. 5 years on, he's still in India, but I told the police who got me out of there. Now I'm 23 and I don't know where to start. Do I go to college? Do I find work? It's all so hard. So this is a very, very recent case that we're still working with. So lastly, again, this is in your report, but these are our recommendations in brief. So what we are saying is that we recommend that there needs to be more academic research into domestic and sexual abuse in the Sikh and Punjabi community, because very little exists out there. Educational activities to help children and young people learn about healthy relationships and understand, and where we can, challenge those negative behaviours and mindsets. We need to have culturally appropriate perpetrator programs. I'm not saying that these need to be, where you call people into a program week on week and deliver, because actually we need to look at the demographic of the perpetrators. But there needs to be a lot more awareness, and we need to be talking to mother-in-laws and sister-in-laws and parents as well as partners and husbands and wives and so on. Culturally sensitive and trauma-informed programs and services also need to be delivered. We need to see more of that. And we need to see funding for by and for organisations. And that's not just for us as Sikh Women's Aid. There are many by and for organisations out there who are constantly fighting to get small pots of money to survive. They're having to close down services because they can't get the funding that they need to continue them. And like us, our last 6 months have been done on a completely voluntary basis. We have secured small pots of money for funding, which we will recruit to. We want support workers, we need some volunteer coordinators, but we have done this solely as Seva, so our selfless service to our community. And we hope that as we go forward, this report and the exposure that we get will also help us to secure funding for our community and wider. And just to make one last point, although we are Sikh Women's Aid, our service is not exclusive to Sikh people only. When we ran as SWAN, we were open to all communities, because one of the pillars of Sikhi is about equality, and we will never turn anybody